Sophie checked the office clock again, feeling a tight knot in her stomach. It was already past 8 in the evening, and she had been ready to leave hours ago, but her manager, David, had called her into his office just as she reached for her bag. "Sophie, I need you to stay tonight," he said, calm but firm. "There's a client report due first thing in the morning, and I can't finish it alone." Sophie hesitated, the thought of another long night at work making her shoulders tense. I already have plans," she said softly, hoping he would let her go. David shook his head gently, his expression serious yet kind. "I know it's late, but it's only for tonight, and I promise I'll make it as quick as possible." His eyes lingered on her face in a way that made her feel both uneasy and unexpectedly comforted. She nodded slowly, realizing she didn't really have a choice, but a part of her was curious why he seemed so insistent. The office was empty and quiet, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the desks. Sophie felt a strange mix of tension and anticipation. She followed David to the conference room, where the laptop was already open and the report stacked neatly on the table. As they sat down, the silence of the building pressed around them, broken only by the soft tapping of keys and the occasional rustle of paper. Sophie couldn't help but notice the exhaustion in David's posture, and it made her feel a subtle pull toward him, a desire to offer comfort she couldn't explain. Hours passed quickly, though Sophie felt every minute. They worked together efficiently, organizing charts, reviewing data, and discussing the details of the report, but beneath the task, an undercurrent of tension lingered. Sophie felt herself drawn to David's quiet confidence, the way he spoke softly yet with authority. She realized she had always admired him from afar, but now, in the stillness of the empty office, that admiration felt different, more personal, more intimate. David told small stories to keep the mood light, and Sophie found herself laughing more than she expected. She noticed how he remembered little details about her life, the way he asked about her weekend, the way he remembered her favorite coffee. It was these small gestures that made her heart race, and she caught herself stealing glances at him when he wasn't looking. The office, which had felt so ordinary during the day, now seemed like a private world just for the two of them. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the office into darkness. Sophie jumped slightly, and David immediately stood, trying to reassure her. "It's just a blackout, nothing to worry about," he said, though his voice carried a hint of tension. They found candles in the supply closet and lit them, the warm glow softening the sharp edges of the room. The darkness outside the candlelight made everything feel closer, more immediate, and Sophie felt a shiver run down her spine, not just from the chill but from the sudden intimacy of the moment. As they returned to the table, the soft flickering light highlighted David's face, making his eyes seem even more intense. He handed her a cup of coffee, and their fingers brushed for just a second, sending a surprising jolt through her. Sophie tried to focus on the work, but she couldn't ignore the warmth spreading through her chest. There was something unspoken between them, a tension that neither dared to name yet both felt. They continued working, organizing charts and checking numbers, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every glance, every small touch seemed heavier, more meaningful. Sophie felt a nervous excitement, and she noticed David's occasional pauses, as if he were choosing his words carefully. She wondered if he felt the same pull, the same connection that had been quietly growing since they sat down together. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once, minutes blending into hours. The office noises, the hum of the air conditioner, the soft tapping of keys, the rustle of papers, became the background to a deeper rhythm. Their shared breathing, their almost accidental touches. Sophie's mind raced with thoughts she barely admitted even to herself. She wanted to lean closer, to speak the feelings she didn't know how to put into words, but she stayed quiet, afraid of breaking the fragile moment. David finally leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I know this isn't normal, staying so late together, but I feel like I can talk to you more tonight than I ever could in the day." His voice was low, and there was a vulnerability there that caught Sophie off guard. She looked at him, her own heart beating faster. "What do you mean?" she asked softly, unsure if she wanted the answer. David hesitated, then continued, I've always admired you, Sophie, the way you handle challenges, the way you stay calm under pressure, and I've felt something more for a long time, something I shouldn't feel at work, but I can't ignore it anymore. Sophie's breath caught, a warmth spreading in her chest. She had noticed his small gestures, the attentiveness, the lingering glances, but hearing him admit it out loud made everything feel real, immediate. Before either could say more, a faint creak from the hallway startled them. Both froze, Sophie's heart skipped a beat, and David smiled, trying to hide the sudden tension. It's just the building settling, he said, though the sound had broken the moment. Sophie felt a pang of disappointment, but also a thrill. The night was far from over, and the connection between them hung in the air, undeniable and full of possibility. Sophie realized that staying overnight at work, something she had dreaded, had changed everything. The quiet office, the shared tasks, the blackout, and the candlelight had created a space where feelings could surface, where admiration could turn into something deeper. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long while, she felt her heart open to the unexpected, to the possibility of something more with David. And as they settled back into their work, side by side, the tension remained, a quiet promise of more to come. Neither spoke, but both understood that this night would be remembered, a night where boundaries blurred and emotions awakened, a night that began as an obligation had become something neither of them could ignore, and Sophie's mind raced with anticipation for what the darkness of the office might reveal next. Sophie and David carefully placed the candles on the table, their soft glow turning the office into a small, quiet world. The shadows danced along the walls, and for a moment, everything outside seemed to disappear. Sophie held her coffee close, feeling its warmth against her hands, but it wasn't the heat from the cup that made her heart race, it was the closeness of David, sitting just across from her, both of them surrounded by silence and flickering light. David's gaze occasionally met hers, lingering longer than necessary, and each time, Sophie felt a sudden flutter in her chest. She tried to focus on the work, reviewing charts and checking numbers, but the office felt different now, softer somehow, more intimate, and every small sound, the rustle of paper, the quiet hum of the candle flames, seemed magnified. She noticed the subtle details about him, the slight crease in his forehead when he concentrated, the way his hand moved as he pointed at the laptop, the gentle tone of his voice as he spoke to her. He handed her another cup of coffee, and their fingers brushed for just a second, a spark running through her she couldn't ignore. Sophie's cheeks flushed, and she looked down quickly, pretending to focus on the report, but she could feel the warmth lingering between them, a silent acknowledgement of something neither had admitted yet. The night had shifted, and every glance and gesture now carried a weight of meaning. They worked for a while longer, sharing small jokes to lighten the tension, laughing softly at their mistakes, and yet beneath the laughter, there was an undeniable electricity. Sophie could feel it building, and she sensed that David could too. She realized that he had always been aware of her in ways she hadn't fully noticed, but now it was impossible to ignore. The office, empty and quiet, had become a place where feelings could surface without interruption. At one point, David leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms and letting out a quiet sigh. It's strange, staying late like this, he admitted, his voice softer than usual. I feel like I can say things to you tonight that I could never say during the day. Sophie's heart skipped a beat, curiosity and fear mixing inside her. What do you mean? She asked, her voice low, careful not to sound too eager. David paused, searching for words. I've always admired you, Sophie, for your focus, your calm, the way you handle everything without losing your balance. He swallowed, and his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. And I've felt something more for a long time, something I shouldn't feel at work, but I can't ignore it anymore. Sophie's chest tightened, a rush of warmth spreading through her. She had noticed the small things, the attention he gave her, the way he listened, the subtle care in his tone, but hearing him say it out loud made her feel as if the air between them had changed. Her hand shook slightly as she placed her coffee down. David. I feel it too, she admitted, the words escaping before she could second-guess herself. Her voice was soft, but it carried the truth she had tried to hide. David's expression softened immediately, a mix of relief and longing crossing his face. He leaned slightly closer, and Sophie could feel the pull, the magnetic tension that had grown throughout the night. The candlelight flickered between them, casting warm shadows over their faces, making the office feel smaller, more personal. As they worked, their hands occasionally brushed against each other, each touch sending another wave of awareness through Sophie. She found herself watching him closely, noticing the subtle curve of his smile, the way his eyes seemed to light up when he looked at her. The office that had once been just a workplace was now filled with unspoken feelings, a quiet intimacy that neither of them could deny. They spoke less and less about work, letting the conversation drift to personal topics, sharing small stories from their lives, laughing at memories, and revealing dreams they rarely discussed with anyone. Sophie felt herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone before, and she could see that David was doing the same. Vulnerability replaced the professional distance, and the night wrapped around them, creating a space where connection could grow freely. Suddenly, a faint sound from the hallway made them both pause, their bodies tensing slightly. Sophie's heart jumped, and David immediately stood, looking toward the sound. "It's just the building settling," he said, trying to sound calm, though the tension in his voice betrayed him. Sophie nodded, but the interruption reminded them both of the fragile bubble they were in. The moment had been perfect, charged with emotion, and now it seemed even more precious because it could be broken at any second. David returned to the table, sitting closer than before, and for a few minutes, neither spoke, both lost in thought. Sophie felt the intensity of the night pressing down on her, and yet it was comforting, exciting, and terrifying all at once. The candlelight flickered on his face, highlighting the seriousness and tenderness in his expression, and Sophie realized that what had started as a late-night work obligation had transformed into something deeply personal, something neither of them expected. She noticed the small, nervous movements he made, how he would glance at her and then look away, and it made her heart ache with longing. Sophie wanted to bridge the distance but also feared crossing an invisible line. The air between them was heavy with possibilities, and each moment seemed to stretch, filled with unspoken words and emotions. She felt a deep connection forming, a pull she had tried to resist but could no longer ignore. As the hours ticked by, they continued to work, but the reports no longer mattered as much. The conversation drifted from charts and figures to memories, dreams, and personal thoughts. Every laugh, every glance, every gentle gesture built the intimacy of the night. Sophie felt her heart opening, and she sensed David was feeling the same. They were no longer just colleagues. They were two people discovering a connection that had quietly grown over time, illuminated by candlelight and the unexpected night alone together. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the office windows, the night had changed them. Sophie realized that staying late, something she had dreaded, had created a moment neither could forget. The tension, the shared stories, the quiet confessions, they had transformed the office into a place of vulnerability, attraction, and understanding. David's presence had become comforting, exciting, and deeply stirring. Sophie knew that whatever happened next, this night would mark the beginning of something new, a connection that could not be ignored. The first light of dawn crept through the blinds, soft and golden, casting long lines across the office. Sophie rubbed her tired eyes and stretched, feeling the ache of a long night, but there was no regret, not beside David, who sat across from her, equally exhausted but strangely calm. They had finished almost all the reports, the mountain of work finally under control, yet neither moved to leave. Both seemed caught in the quiet aftermath of the night, a fragile space filled with unspoken feelings. David leaned back in his chair, his eyes resting on Sophie. "I know this night was unusual," he said quietly, his voice carrying both warmth and hesitation. "I didn't plan for it to happen this way, but I don't regret it." Sophie smiled softly, her heart full. She could see the honesty in his eyes. "Neither do I, David," she whispered, I've never felt this connected before. The office felt smaller, warmer, the early sunlight mingling with the candlelight still lingering in their minds, creating a world that felt suspended between reality and the promise of something new. They gathered the last of the papers, organizing them neatly into the folders that would be ready for the client, but even the mundane tasks felt different now, infused with the intimacy of shared vulnerability. Each movement was conscious, each glance more meaningful. Sophie noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way he exhaled slowly when their hands accidentally brushed. She felt a thrill and a comfort at the same time, an awareness that neither had experienced before at work. David finally stood, walking toward the window, looking out at the quiet street below. "Sophie," he said softly, turning back to her, "I know this may seem sudden, but I want to be honest. I don't know what comes next, but I want to figure it out with you." His words were simple, direct, but full of weight. Sophie's breath caught, a fluttering sensation rising in her chest. She felt the truth of her own heart in that moment, the same pull, the same desire for something more. She rose from her chair and took a step closer. "Then we face it together," she said, her voice steady, filled with a mix of courage and longing. David's eyes softened, and he reached out, taking her hand gently in his, the touch grounding yet electrifying. Both of them felt the significance of the gesture, a quiet promise that this night had changed everything, and neither would forget it. The office was silent except for the faint hum of the morning, the papers stacked neatly, the coffee cup still warm. Sophie realized how much had shifted in just a few hours. The professional distance that had always existed between them was gone, replaced by something delicate and real, a connection built on vulnerability, laughter, and shared work. She felt a mixture of relief and excitement, knowing that whatever happened next, they had crossed a line into honesty, and that honesty could not be undone. David squeezed her hand, and Sophie returned the gesture, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. They didn't speak for a few moments, just standing there, letting the quiet morning sink in. Sophie's mind replayed the night, from the blackout to the candlelight, from whispered stories to the confession of feelings. Every second had been meaningful, every glance had carried weight, and now the future felt wide open, filled with possibilities neither of them had anticipated. Finally, David spoke again. "I think this night was meant to happen," he said softly, "even if it was unexpected, even if it was inconvenient. I think it showed us something we both needed to see." Sophie nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yes, it showed me that I can trust you with more than work, with more than my thoughts, maybe even with my heart." Her words were quiet, but sincere, and David's expression reflected the same depth of feeling, a shared understanding that went beyond words. They began to gather their belongings, but neither wanted to break the connection by leaving just yet. The office that had felt cold and empty hours ago now held warmth and a strange sense of security. Sophie noticed how David's presence made the space feel safe, alive, intimate. She wondered if he felt the same, and when he reached out again to brush a strand of hair from her face, she realized he did, and it was tender, careful, full of consideration. Stepping toward the door, David paused, looking at Sophie with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "I don't know how this will work at the office, or how we'll explain ourselves, but I know this. I want to explore it," he said, a mixture of caution and hope in his tone. Sophie smiled softly, squeezing his hand once more. "We'll take it one step at a time," she replied, the certainty in her voice surprising even her. Both of them knew the path ahead might be complicated, but the night had given them courage, honesty, and a spark that could not be ignored. As they walked out together, the morning sunlight warming their faces, Sophie looked back at the office, a small smile tugging at her lips. This place had started as a mundane workspace, had become a place of tension, confession, and connection, and now it held memories that neither of them would ever forget. David stayed close beside her, his hand brushing hers lightly, and for the first time in a long while, Sophie felt excitement for what the future could bring. The street was quiet, the world waking up slowly around them, and Sophie felt a sense of anticipation, a flutter of hope. David's presence beside her was comforting, exhilarating, and grounding all at once. They didn't need to speak about what happened, they both understood, perfectly and completely. The night had been unexpected, overwhelming, and transformative, and now the morning promised a new beginning, a chance to explore what they had discovered, together. As they stepped into the day, Sophie realized that the night had not just been about staying late for work, it had been about revealing hidden feelings, taking risks, and allowing themselves to be vulnerable. The connection between her and David was no longer quiet or unspoken, it was real, tangible, and full of possibility, and though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: this night had changed everything, and they were ready to face whatever came next, together.